I speak 9 languages, the black girl said proudly. And just like that, the air shifted. Every head in the room, some gray, some balding, all male, turned slowly. Not in awe, not in curiosity, but in disbelief. The 38th floor of Hawthorne Capitol wasn't used to interruptions, especially not from 12-year-old girls. Especially not black girls. Vincent Hawthorne let out a loud, slow laugh. The kind that bounces off marble and glass like it owns the room. Darling, he sneered, leaning back in his $6,000 Italian leather chair. I barely trust my CFO to read quarterly reports correctly. And now we've got a spelling bee champ at the table. The room chuckled. Forced. Tight-lipped. The type of laugh rich people use to protect power. Aaliyah Carter didn't blink. She stood next to her mother, Janelle Carter, founder, CEO, disruptor, and today, the only black woman in the room. Vincent continued, amused by his own arrogance. This is why legacy capital matters, he said. Because we can't afford to be run by sob stories and fairy tales. We're not in the business of black stories that sound good on paper but fall apart under scrutiny. That sentence, that final dig, echoed through the boardroom like a slap. Aaliyah took one step forward. Her voice didn't rise. Her shoulders didn't shake. If you'd like, I can read the antique document you just paid $250,000 for, she said, gesturing to the parchment lying untouched at the end of the table. It's written in classical Farsi, followed by medieval Latin and Old Arabic. Vincent stopped smiling. This moment wasn't about cute talent or viral videos. It wasn't about showing off. This was about dignity. About being underestimated for too long. This was a black story. Not the kind that asks to be included, but the kind that redefines who gets to lead the room. And if you're still with us, stay right here. Because in the next 5 minutes, a little girl is about to shatter more than silence. She's going to rewrite the rules, one language at a time. If this moves you, like, share, and subscribe. Not for clicks, but because somebody out there still needs to hear. Brilliance has no skin tone. Before that moment in the boardroom, before the smirk, the challenge, the shock, there were years no one in that glass tower cared to see. Janelle Carter wasn't born into power. She built every rung of her ladder with calloused hands and sleepless nights. Raised in Cleveland, Ohio, by a single father who worked double shifts at the bus depot, she grew up in a house where heat was a luxury and silence came only when everyone was too tired to argue. She learned early that the world didn't expect much from women like her. Especially not black girls who asked too many questions. But Janelle asked anyway. Engineering fascinated her. Not just wires and circuits, but systems. Why did some things flow while others clogged? Why did energy get wasted when it could be redirected? She applied those questions to more than machines. She applied them to life. With a scholarship to Howard University and a part-time job cleaning dorm bathrooms, she earned a degree in environmental engineering. And when corporations wouldn't give her a chance, she created her own. Carter Renewables started in her kitchen, with a whiteboard from the discount store and a laptop donated by a church. 10 years later, it became one of the fastest-growing green energy startups in the Midwest. Not flashy, not loud, but smart, resilient, built for people who had been left out of the clean energy conversation. And then came Aaliyah. Her daughter wasn't raised to think inside limits. She grew up at planning meetings, community rallies, and late-night coding sessions beside her mom. She asked questions the same way Janelle once had, bold, direct, and inconvenient to the status quo. But still, no matter how many milestones Carter Renewables hit, no matter how many neighborhoods it powered or internships it created, when Janelle walked into rooms like Hawthorne Capitol, she wasn't met with partnership. She was met with polite smiles and unspoken doubt. The kind of doubt that said, "You're a diversity hire. A photo op. A box to check." They didn't see the work, the hours, the brilliance. And they definitely didn't see Aaliyah coming. They saw a little black girl with neat braids and clear eyes. But what they missed, what they never imagined, was that behind those quiet eyes was a fire forged from generations of being overlooked. And that fire was about to speak. The meeting had been scheduled weeks in advance. On paper, it was just another pitch, a funding round discussion, a potential strategic partnership between Carter Renewables and Hawthorne Capital. But in reality, Janelle knew what it was. It was an audition. Not for her ideas. Not for her growth chart. But for her place at the table. She arrived 5 minutes early, as she always did. Crisp blazer, minimal makeup, every document organized, every slide rehearsed. Aaliyah walked beside her. She had the day off school and begged to come along, promising to stay quiet and just observe. Janelle agreed. Her daughter needed to see the world as it was, not just how they hoped it would be. The elevator doors opened to a world wrapped in wealth. Marble floors, gold trim, glass walls that stretched to the clouds. It wasn't just expensive. It was intentional. Everything screamed power, distance, untouchability. A young man in a tailored suit greeted them. He didn't ask Janelle's name. He just glanced down at her skin, then at her daughter, and said, "Deliveries go through the service entrance." Before Janelle could respond, a woman in heels appeared from behind him, face flushed. "Mr. Hawthorne is waiting. Please follow me." Vincent Hawthorne was everything they said, white, silver-haired, built like a man who had never carried his own luggage. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were already scanning. Not her slides. Not her resume. Her earrings. Her skin. Her presence. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "We've reviewed your proposal," he began, voice smooth, like a man selling ice in winter. "Impressive growth. Interesting numbers. But, of course, we look beyond the data." Janelle knew that line. It meant, "You're not what I expected." Vincent kept talking. "We value stories. Human angles. You know, the kind that look good in press releases. Especially black stories. People love those." Aaliyah stirred in her seat. He went on. "You've built something admirable. But scaling requires refinement, structure, and frankly, access to circles you don't seem familiar with." The words were sugar-coated, but the intent was sharp. Janelle sat up straighter. Then Vincent added one final remark. "Careless or calculated, it didn't matter. And bringing your daughter today. I get it. Good photo. Strong message. Little black girl. Big dreams. People eat that up." Silence. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. And something inside the room began to shift. Aaliyah didn't ask for the floor. She simply took it. Her voice, quiet but clear, cut through the silence left hanging by Vincent's last remark. "If I'm just here for a photo," she said, eyes fixed on him, "would you like me to read that manuscript on your desk?" The room tensed. Heads turned toward a weathered scroll laid neatly beside a leather notepad. Cream-colored parchment, worn edges, writing that spiraled across the page in unfamiliar ink. The status symbol. Vincent had mentioned it earlier, boasting of a recent acquisition from an auction house in Zurich, an intellectual trophy, he called it. Experts couldn't translate it, not fully. He raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're telling me you can read that?" Aaliyah nodded once. "If I make a mistake, you can correct me." Janelle didn't move. Her breath caught, unsure if she should stop her daughter or let her continue. But then she saw Aaliyah's hands, calm, steady, no tremble. The same hands that used to hold picture books in preschool. Now reaching for something far greater. Vincent smirked. "Be my guest." Aaliyah stepped forward and gently placed her fingers along the edge of the parchment. She studied it, not rushing, her eyes scanning each line like a pianist reading sheet music. Then she began. First, in classical Arabic. Her voice curved gently, the syllables elegant and smooth, rising and falling like calligraphy spoken aloud. Then came the Latin, medieval, rigid, yet lyrical. Then Farsi, her accent measured, deliberate. Line by line, language after language, she continued. The men in suits leaned forward, unsure if they were witnessing a party trick or a revolution. Vincent's grin faded. He hadn't expected performance, he expected posturing. But there was no stutter, no hesitation, no showmanship, just mastery. Aaliyah paused only once, to clarify a term in Old Greek, then resumed, switching seamlessly to Sanskrit, her tone deeper, more grounded. By the time she reached the final line in ancient Hebrew, the boardroom was silent again, but not with condescension. This was a different kind of quiet. Reverent. Unfamiliar. Aaliyah looked up. Would you like me to translate it? Vincent swallowed. Go ahead. She straightened. It speaks of the wisdom of water. How rivers carve through stone not with force, but with patience. And how language, like water, connects what arrogance divides. Janelle exhaled. The girl they once thought was a photo op just cracked open the foundation of the room. And it wasn't even lunchtime. Aaliyah didn't come from prep schools or private tutors. Her education wasn't shaped by ivy-covered gates or legacy admissions. It came from fluorescent lights, crowded city buses, and a pocket-sized notebook with dog-eared pages and margin scribbles. After school, while some kids scrolled endlessly on their phones or waited for rides in black SUVs, Aaliyah walked 4 blocks to the Southside Public Library. Rain or shine, summer or snow. A librarian named Mrs. Jeanette always saved her a seat, table 7, near the world language section. That was where the real work happened. She didn't start by wanting to learn 9 languages. It began with 1, Spanish. Her grandmother spoke it. But when Aaliyah heard Mrs. Jeanette reading aloud in Italian one afternoon, she stayed to listen. The rhythm, the warmth, the differences, it lit something in her. So she asked, "Can I learn that too?" She found Duolingo, borrowed language books, and created flashcards with old index paper. One by one, the library staff started noticing. Mr. Romero, who worked maintenance during the day and once taught literature in Buenos Aires, offered to help her with Spanish and Portuguese. Then came Ms. Fatima, a Syrian refugee who ran evening conversation tables in Arabic. She let Aaliyah sit in, even though it was meant for adults. Dr. Ling, once a university linguistics professor in Beijing before fleeing political persecution, began meeting Aaliyah on Saturday mornings. They started with Mandarin. Then, over time, classical Chinese. Each teacher came from a different continent, a different history, a different heartbreak. But they all shared the same belief, that language was a bridge. And Aaliyah. She was crossing all of them. She kept a separate journal for each language, organized with colored tabs and careful notes. She recorded audio of herself speaking, then listened back, correcting her own tones. She didn't treat mistakes like failures. She treated them like part of the path. By the time she turned 12, she had conversational ability in 6 languages, fluent reading comprehension in 3 more, and a heart that never saw accents as flaws. Her community, immigrants, elders, library staff, volunteers, they became her village. They poured into her, not because she was famous or wealthy, but because she showed up. Every day. Ready to learn. Willing to listen. And now, standing in a boardroom on the 38th floor, she was carrying every single one of them with her. Vincent Hawthorne was a man used to control. He knew how to dominate a room, his voice, his money, his sheer presence. He built his empire not just with capital, but with confidence. The kind of confidence that rarely encountered correction. But now, standing across from a 12-year-old girl who had just read 6 languages and translated a centuries-old manuscript with ease, he felt something new. Something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. It settled in his chest like a weight he couldn't name. He crossed his arms tighter, as if folding them would hold back the doubt creeping up his spine. The room stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but respect. Not for him, but for her. Janelle didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her daughter had just made a statement no pitch deck could match. Vincent glanced toward his assistant, hoping for a rescue, a distraction, even a smirk of disbelief he could latch onto. But the young man stared blankly ahead, stunned. He cleared his throat. "Well, that was impressive," he said, voice thin and forced. "Very entertaining." It was a weak pivot. Everyone could tell. One of the board members, a woman named Evelyn, who had said nothing until now, leaned forward slightly. "Do we know where she learned all this?" she asked, more curious than skeptical. Janelle smiled softly. "Public library. Community centers. Volunteer teachers. No elite schools. Just commitment." Vincent tried to shift gears. "Still, talent like that. It's rare. Surely this must be rehearsed." The words barely landed. No one laughed. Then Marcus Trent spoke. He was Hawthorne's legal counsel. Calm, calculating, and rarely emotional. But this time, his tone held something else. "Maybe we've spent too much time looking at resumes," he said quietly, "and not enough time listening to people who live outside these windows." Vincent stiffened. This was not how the meeting was supposed to go. He had planned to dominate. To dismiss Carter renewables politely, maybe buy them out later. But now, the power dynamics were off. Tilted. A girl with braids and a borrowed book bag had just exposed the cracks in his marble tower. And the worst part? She didn't even do it to win. She did it because she could. That realization. It echoed louder than any words. Aaliyah didn't rush. She let the silence breathe, let it wrap itself around the tension in the room like a pause that demanded attention. Then she stepped forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet clarity. "If we're going to keep talking," she said, "then there are 3 things I need to say. And 3 things you need to do." Vincent blinked. He looked at Janelle, then at the board. No one moved. Janelle didn't interrupt. She had raised her daughter to recognize moments that matter. And this wasn't about funding or optics. This was about dignity. Aaliyah lifted her chin. "First," she began, "you need to apologize to my mom." Vincent shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Not just a quick sorry. You say her name. Her full name. Janelle Carter. You look her in the eyes. And you say what you're sorry for, not because it makes you look good, but because you know you were wrong." The room held its breath. "Second," she continued, "you fund 200 scholarships. Real ones. For students from neighborhoods like mine. For kids who dream big but don't have the map. You help them get there." Vincent opened his mouth, but she kept going. No back-end PR play. No fancy gala. Just straight access. Books, classes, mentors, room to grow. You build the bridge. You don't paint over the gap. Janelle's eyes glistened, but she stayed composed. Aaliyah raised a final finger. "Third," she said, "you learn a new language." Vincent frowned. "Every Tuesday night, you go to the South Side Library. You sit at a regular table. No special chairs. No executive treatment. You learn Swahili from the same community you've overlooked." She paused. "Because if you want to lead in a world that looks like all of us, you have to understand more than numbers. You have to know how it feels to start from scratch." The boardroom was silent. But it wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence that comes when truth enters a space and refuses to leave. Vincent looked at her, and for the first time, didn't see a child. He saw accountability. In sneakers and braids. And he knew, this was the moment everything changed. Tuesday evening came faster than Vincent expected. The driver offered to wait. Vincent declined. He needed to do this part alone. The Southside Public Library didn't have valet parking or glass chandeliers. The air inside smelled of old paper and floor polish. It was quiet, but not the silence of indifference. It was the kind of quiet built from focus, from people trying, learning, stretching. He walked past a mural of children reading beneath a tree and found table 5. It wasn't a boardroom table. It was scarred wood, uneven legs, one corner chipped. Across from him sat a woman in her 60s wearing a faded green headscarf and a name tag that read, Mama Zuri, Swahili instructor. She smiled. "You're here." Vincent nodded, unsure whether to offer a handshake or an apology. He did both. "I'm here to learn," he said simply. Mama Zuri handed him a worksheet and a well-used pencil. "Then we start from the beginning. Lesson 1. Greetings." She wrote the words slowly. "Jambo." "Repeat after me," she said. Vincent tried. His tongue stumbled. She didn't flinch. Again. He did. And again. And again. By the 10th try, he got it close enough for her to nod. Around them, a circle of learners practiced. A bus driver. A waitress. A retired nurse. And now, him. The billionaire who once mocked learning was now sweating over syllables. "Swahili isn't hard," Mama Zuri said. "It just asks that you respect its rhythm. You don't rush meaning. You meet it." Vincent wrote that line in the margin of his notebook. They practiced simple phrases. "Thank you. Please. My name is. Where is the market?" It was humbling. For decades, Vincent had been the man with answers, with data, with deadlines. But here, at this table, his knowledge didn't give him an edge. His net worth didn't help him conjugate verbs. What mattered was effort. And slowly, without cameras, without headlines, without anyone to impress, he began to change. Not through grand gestures, but through every mistake he didn't quit after. Through every word he tried again. And through every time he said asante, thank you, not to be polite, but because he meant it. In that small room, under flickering lights, a man unlearned pride and relearned humanity. One syllable at a time. Marcus Trent had built his career standing just behind power. As Hawthorne Capital's legal counsel for nearly 2 decades, he was the man in the tailored gray suit with a silver pen and a calm voice. He didn't interrupt. He calculated. He didn't shake hands unnecessarily. He listened, recorded, and made sure his clients never said too much. He had helped Vincent close dozens of deals, quietly cleaning up loose ends with the precision of a surgeon. But something about that meeting with the Carters had stayed with him. It wasn't just the languages, or the confidence. It was the clarity. Aaliyah had spoken like someone twice her age, but without the ego. She wasn't trying to take anyone's seat. She was trying to remind the room that the table should be bigger. 3 days after Vincent began Swahili lessons, Marcus scheduled a private meeting with Aaliyah Carter. They met in a downtown cafe. Nothing fancy. Just hot coffee, no ties, no press. "I'm not here as Hawthorne's attorney," he said. "I'm here as Marcus." Janelle looked up, cautious but open. "I want to offer pro bono legal support for your scholarship initiative," he said. "Contracts, non-profit structure, compliance. I can help you scale it cleanly." Janelle was stunned. "Why?" He took a breath. "Because I've spent years drafting contracts that protect money, but not people. And after that boardroom, I realized I've been on the wrong side of too many tables." He didn't need applause. He wasn't looking for redemption, just a chance to be useful, on purpose. By the following week, Marcus had officially filed paperwork to establish the Carter Hawthorne Scholarship Trust, a name Janelle insisted on keeping to show that bridges could be built, even between former opponents. Internally, some whispered that Marcus had turned on Vincent. But he hadn't betrayed anyone. He had realigned. Away from the quiet complicity of watching things stay the same, and toward the louder Messier work of helping something better take shape. He didn't leave Hawthorne Capital that day. But he did stop defending systems that rewarded silence over justice. Instead, he began drafting something new, a legal framework for equity, brick by brick, clause by clause. Not perfect. Not complete. But finally, on the right side of the table. For a few days, it seemed like progress had momentum. Vincent was attending his Tuesday night Swahili classes without fail. Marcus had quietly stepped into a new role, drafting the foundation for something meaningful. The Carter Hawthorne Scholarship Trust was already generating buzz in civic circles. But then came the backlash. It started small, a comment on a business blog. Anonymous. Dismissive. Child prodigy or PR puppet. Let's see her prove it. Then came a meme, Aaliyah's face photoshopped onto a dictionary cover, with the caption, 9 languages? More like 9 lies. It circulated fast. From group chats to Reddit threads to whispered hallway conversations in corporate offices. None of it used explicit slurs. But it dripped with familiar venom, the kind dressed in sarcasm, masked as fair questions. Janelle saw it first. Then Marcus. Then Vincent. But Aaliyah. She had already seen it. She just hadn't said anything yet. One afternoon, she walked into the library early, her notebook clutched tight. Mama Zuri looked up. You okay, baby? Aaliyah nodded. Then paused. They want me to perform. To prove I deserve respect. Again. She sat down slowly. But I'm not a trick. I'm not a show. Mama Zuri smiled gently. No, you're not. You're a light. And sometimes light makes people squint. That night, at home, Aaliyah drafted a letter. Handwritten. Not for social media, not for press. Just a message sent privately to the library board, Vincent, Marcus, and her mother. If there must be a public demonstration, she wrote, then let it be on my terms. No cameras. No audience clapping. No journalists looking for sound bites. She outlined her conditions, a closed academic colloquium, moderated by 3 credentialed scholars from respected universities. A true linguistic peer review. No showboating. No spectacle. If you want a performance, she wrote, go somewhere else. If you want understanding, I'll show up. Vincent read it twice. Janelle read it with tears in her eyes. And Marcus? He picked up the phone that night and called a colleague at the University of Chicago. We're not defending a girl's talent, he said. We're defending her right to not have to defend it over and over again. Aaliyah didn't ask for a fight. But when the world knocked on her door with doubt, again, she didn't flinch. She set the table. And she set the rules. Saturday morning, the reading room at the University of Chicago was quiet, sunlight filtering through tall windows onto polished oak tables. No cameras, no stage lights. Just a circle of chairs, notebooks, and 3 distinguished professors seated across from Aaliyah Carter. Dr. Evelyn Chong, a scholar of classical Arabic and Persian texts. Professor Martin Alvarez, expert in medieval Latin and Indo-European linguistics. And Dr. Deborah Klein, who had spent 30 years teaching ancient Hebrew and textual interpretation. All had received the manuscript in advance. All had been briefed, not on the controversy, but on the purpose. This was not a trial. This was not a child's audition. This was scholarship. Aaliyah entered the room with her mother and Mama Zuri behind her. She wore no special outfit. Just jeans, a clean white blouse, and a single braided strand tied in blue ribbon. Her notebook was thick, pages curled from use. She began without preamble. First, the classical Arabic section. Her pronunciation was precise, not memorized but understood. She paused after the 3rd line, offering 2 possible interpretations of a metaphor comparing time to a river. Dr. Chong raised her eyebrows. That distinction is often missed by my graduate students. Next, she moved to the Latin. She read slowly, then pointed out a grammatical inconsistency in the 5th line, possibly a copying error from the original scribe. Professor Alvarez smiled. Very likely, he said, making a note. Then came the ancient Hebrew. Aaliyah hesitated just slightly before starting. The letters were dense, the phrasing subtle. But she handled it with care. After reading, she offered a reflection on how the text's use of silence was more powerful than its verbs. Dr. Klein leaned forward. Where did you learn to see silence that way? Aaliyah answered, from my mom. She's lived a life where silence spoke louder than anything else. The room paused, not in pity, but in respect. Over the next hour, she read 7 segments across 5 languages. Not perfect, but always thoughtful. Always grounded in meaning, not performance. When she finished, the professors didn't clap. They nodded. Not to praise, but to acknowledge. This was not mimicry. This was mastery. Dr. Chong closed her notebook and said quietly, "Let the record reflect, this is the real thing." Aaliyah smiled, not wide, but certain. She hadn't just passed the test. She had rewritten the rules of what a test should be. The Monday after the reading, something shifted. Not in headlines. Not in viral clips. But in people. At the Southside Library, new faces filled the seats. Middle schoolers, elders, janitors, nurses, mail carriers, all sitting at folding tables with borrowed notebooks. They weren't there to see Aaliyah. They were there because of her. Mama Zuri called it the ripple. Janelle called it proof. And Vincent, he called it responsibility. He didn't just write the check for the Carter Hawthorne Scholarship Trust. He matched it with policy. 200 full scholarships, covering tuition, transportation, and mentorship support. But it didn't stop there. Vincent announced a community language grant, free public language courses, led by credentialed volunteers, hosted in public libraries across the city. Swahili, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, ASL, Yoruba. And for every scholar accepted, there was a give-back hour. 1 hour a week to mentor, teach, assist, so the cycle didn't end. It multiplied. Marcus helped finalize the foundation's charter. No corporate logos. No photo ops. The only names that mattered were the ones being called out correctly, with care. At Carter Renewables, Janelle introduced a new hiring model, skills-based interviews, open access internship pipelines, and a rotating seat at leadership meetings for youth observers. Not to speak, just to see, so that young people could finally understand how power moves and how to move it differently. And Aaliyah. She went back to the library on Tuesday, notebook in hand, same as always. She wasn't a prodigy. She was a learner. Still stumbling through Swahili verbs, still showing up on time, still listening harder than most adults in the room. She wasn't trying to become famous. She was trying to make space. In one interview, when asked what she wanted to be, she answered plainly, "I want to become someone who gets the work done. Quietly. Consistently. Without needing permission to care." This isn't a story about winning. It's a story about learning, and then using what you've learned to lift someone else. So if this story touched you, share it. Not for applause, but because somewhere out there, someone like Aaliyah is still waiting to hear that they're not alone. And that brilliance, when given room to breathe, doesn't just rise. It multiplies.